The words echoed through the bedchamber like a death sentence. Give me an heir, then leave. That is your only purpose here. Elowyn Ashford stood frozen beside the marriage bed, still wearing the ivory gown she'd been wed in 3 hours ago. Her husband, Lysander Vane, Duke of Thornwood, hadn't even looked at her when he spoke. He stood at the window with his back to her, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. I don't understand, she whispered. What is there to understand? His voice was cold, clinical. Your father owed me £40,000. He offered you as payment. I accepted because I require an heir. Once you've fulfilled that obligation, you'll be given a cottage on the northern estate and a modest allowance. We need never see each other again. Elowyn's hands trembled at her sides. She'd known this marriage wasn't a love match. She'd known her father had sold her to settle his gambling debts. But she'd hoped, foolishly, desperately, that the Duke might at least treat her with basic dignity. You speak of me as though I'm livestock. I speak of you as what you are, a transaction. Lysander finally turned, and she saw his face clearly for the first time since the ceremony. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair swept back from a severe brow, eyes the color of winter storms. Handsome, devastatingly so, but utterly devoid of warmth. Did your father tell you differently? Did he promise you romance and affection? Then he lied. I don't have those to give. She remembered her father's words the morning he'd told her about the arrangement. The Duke of Thornwood is powerful, Elowyn. Wealthy beyond measure. You'll want for nothing. He'd neglected to mention she'd be discarded like a used handkerchief once her womb served its purpose. What if I refuse? The words escaped before she could stop them. Something flickered in Lysander's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. Refuse what, precisely? You're already my wife. The contract is signed. Your father's debts are cleared. There is nothing left to refuse. I could refuse to share your bed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Lysander laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that made her skin crawl. You could try, but consider your alternatives carefully. I could send you back to your father in disgrace. I could have the marriage annulled and let society know you were deficient in your duties. Your family would be ruined. Your younger sisters would never find husbands. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker beneath it. Or you could accept reality, fulfill your purpose, and live comfortably for the rest of your days. The choice seems obvious to me. Elowyn's throat tightened. Her sisters. Marguerite was 16, Colette only 14. If Elowyn brought scandal upon the family, their futures would be destroyed. He'd trapped her completely. I see you understand, Lysander said, reading her expression. Mrs. Hatch will show you to your chambers in the East Wing. I'll send for you when required. He turned back to the window, dismissing her without another glance. That will be all. Elowyn stood there for a long moment, rage and humiliation warring in her chest. She wanted to scream. She wanted to claw that cold indifference from his face. She wanted to make him see her as something more than a vessel for his legacy, but she had no power here, no allies, no options, not yet. She walked to the door with her spine straight and her chin raised. Her mother had taught her that dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered, and Elowyn would not surrender hers, not to him, not to anyone. Your Grace, she said, pausing at the threshold. He didn't turn. What is it? You should know that I have an excellent memory. I remember every slight, every cruelty, every debt owed. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. You may think of me as a transaction, but transactions have terms, and terms can be renegotiated. She left before he could respond, closing the door softly behind her. In the corridor, the housekeeper waited, a stern woman with silver hair and knowing eyes. Mrs. Hatch, presumably. The woman studied Elowen for a moment, then nodded slowly, as though she'd seen something that satisfied her. "This way, Your Grace," Mrs. Hatch said. "Your chambers are prepared." Elowen followed, her ivory gown trailing behind her like a shroud. She was a duchess now, wife to one of the most powerful men in the realm, and she was utterly alone in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. But prisons could be escaped, cages could be broken, and men who underestimated women often lived to regret it. Lysander Vane had made her a transaction. She would make herself indispensable, and then she would make him pay. 3 weeks into her imprisonment, for that's how Elowen thought of it, she discovered that Thornwood Manor was rotting from within. Not physically. The estate was immaculate, every stone polished, every garden manicured. But the ledgers told a different story. She'd found them by accident. The Duke had summoned her to his study to discuss matters of conception. A humiliating conversation conducted with the same warmth one might use when breeding horses. Afterward, he'd been called away by a messenger, leaving her alone in the room. The ledger sat open on his desk. Elowen knew she shouldn't look. A proper wife would have averted her eyes. Elowen had stopped being proper the moment her husband called her a transaction. What she found made her blood run cold. Thornwood's finances were hemorrhaging. Investments that should have returned thousands showed losses. Rents from tenant farms were half what they should be. And there were payments, massive sums sent quarterly to someone identified only as MV, £60,000 over the past 2 years. More than her father had ever owed. Enough to bleed an estate dry. Someone was destroying Thornwood from within. And if the projections were accurate, the dukedom would be bankrupt within 18 months. "Find something interesting," Elowen spun. An older woman stood in the doorway. Not Mrs. Hatch, but someone who carried herself with unmistakable authority. Silver hair swept into an elegant twist, jewels dripping from her throat, eyes like chips of obsidian. "I was merely snooping. Yes, I saw." The woman glided into the room. "I'm Morwen Vane, Lysander's mother, and you must be the broodmare he purchased." The cruelty was casual, almost elegant. Elowen recognized it immediately, the practiced viciousness of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "I prefer Duchess, actually." Morwen's lips curved. "How delightful. She has spirit. That will make breaking her so much more satisfying." "I don't break easily." "Everyone breaks, child. It's simply a matter of finding the right pressure points." Morwen's gaze drifted to the ledger, still open on the desk. "Tell me, what did you see in my son's private documents?" Elowen's mind raced. She could lie. She could play ignorant. But something told her that Morwen already knew what those ledgers contained, and perhaps more. "I saw enough to know that someone is destroying this estate from within," Elowen said carefully. "The question is whether you're the predator or the prey." Morwen laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. "Oh, I like you. You're cleverer than you look." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. But clever girls who ask too many questions tend to have accidents in old houses like this. Staircases are treacherous. Balconies crumble. You understand. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. That night, Elowen couldn't sleep. Morwen's threat echoed in her mind, tangling with the numbers she'd memorized from the ledgers. MV, Morwen Vane. Was the Dowager Duchess stealing from her own son? And if so, why? A sound from the corridor made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy and uneven, passing her door. Then a crash from somewhere deeper in the manor. Against every instinct screaming for her to stay hidden, Elowen pulled on her robe and followed. The noise led her to the west wing, Lysander's domain, forbidden to her. She found him in his private study, slumped in a chair before a dying fire, a shattered glass at his feet. He was drunk, perhaps more than drunk. His cravat hung loose, his shirt was disheveled, and his face, that cold, controlled mask, had cracked entirely. He looked destroyed. "What are you doing here?" His voice slurred slightly. "I didn't summon you. I heard a noise. I thought someone might be hurt." "Someone is hurt." He laughed bitterly. "But not in any way you can fix." Ilawan should have left. He'd made it clear she was nothing to him. But something in his expression, a grief so raw it seemed to bleed, held her in place. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. "Nothing that concerns a transaction." But the word seemed to wound him as he spoke it. He looked at his hands, flexing them as though seeing them for the first time. "Do you know what day it is?" "Tuesday. It's the anniversary of my brother's death. Corvin. He drowned 5 years ago today." Lysander's jaw tightened. They called it an accident, a tragic accident while swimming in the lake. But Corvin hated the water. He never learned to swim. He had no reason to be anywhere near that lake, unless someone brought him there. Ilawan felt the pieces shifting, forming a picture she didn't yet fully understand. "You think he was murdered?" "I know he was. I just can't prove it." He looked up at her, and for one unguarded moment, she saw the man beneath the ice, wounded, furious, completely alone. "My mother controls the estate finances. Did you know that? My father's will was specific. She manages the accounts until I produce an heir of legitimate blood. Only then do I gain full control. The ledgers, the missing money, the payments to MV. She's bleeding you dry," Elowen breathed, "keeping you dependent. And your brother." "Corvin was investigating her. He found something. 3 days later, he was dead." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck midnight. Elowen understood now why Lysander had built walls of ice around himself. He was trapped in his own home, surrounded by enemies, unable to trust anyone, just like her. "Your mother threatened me today," she said. "She warned me that clever girls have accidents." Lysander's eyes sharpened, the haze of alcohol burning away. "She what?" "It seems we have a common enemy, Your Grace." Elowen met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps it's time we stopped treating each other as adversaries and started considering an alliance." The word hung between them like a challenge. Lysander studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his guarded expression began to thaw. "Sit down, Duchess. It seems we have much to discuss." They talked until dawn bled through the windows. Lysander told her everything. How his father had died when he was 22, leaving a will that granted Morwen control of estate finances until a legitimate heir was born. How Corvin had discovered discrepancies in the accounts and begun quietly investigating. How Corvin had confided his suspicions to Lysander just days before his death, and how those suspicions had died with him, buried beneath a verdict of tragic accident. "I've spent 5 years trying to find proof," Lysander said, his voice rough from whiskey and confession. "But my mother is meticulous. Every document I need is locked away. Every servant who might have seen something has been dismissed or silenced. I'm a duke in name only, trapped in my own estate while she strips it to the bones." "Why does she need the money?" Elowen asked. "She lives here. She wants for nothing." "I don't know." That's what Corvin was trying to discover when he died. Lysander's hands clenched. 60,000 pounds has vanished in the past 2 years alone. It's going somewhere. To someone. And I can't touch a single ledger without her knowing. Elowen thought of the numbers she'd memorized, the patterns she'd glimpsed. "But I can." Lysander's gaze sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm invisible to her. A broodmare, remember? She doesn't see me as a threat. She sees me as furniture." Elowen leaned forward. "I can move through this house in ways you can't. I can befriend servants, access rooms, find documents. She'll never suspect because she's already dismissed me as worthless." You're suggesting you become my spy. I'm suggesting we become partners. Elowen held his gaze. You need information. I need power. Right now, I have nothing. No status, no protection, no future beyond the cottage you promised to discard me in. But if we work together, if we expose your mother's crimes and free you from her control, then what? What do you want in return? Elowen had thought about this during the long, sleepless hours since Morwen's threat. I want to be a real duchess, not a transaction, not a vessel. I want a place at your side, publicly, permanently. I want my sisters brought here, educated, given dowries that will secure their futures, and I want your word that you will never, ever speak to me the way you did on our wedding night again. The silence stretched between them. Lysander studied her as though seeing her for the first time. You negotiated those terms very quickly, he said finally, almost as if you'd been planning this. I've been planning my survival since I was 12 years old and realized my father would sell me to the highest bidder the moment it suited him. Her voice didn't waver. I learned young that no one protects women like me. We protect ourselves. A new awareness dawned in Lysander's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred survivor. If my mother discovers what we're doing, she'll destroy you. She's killed before. She won't hesitate to kill again. Then we don't let her discover us. Elowen extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Lysander looked at her hand, then at her face. The ice in his eyes hadn't melted, but it had fractured, just slightly. We have an agreement. He took her hand, his grip firm and warm. But understand this, Elowen. If you betray me, if you're working with her, I will end you myself. I've lost too much to risk trusting the wrong person again. I would expect nothing less. They shook once, sealing a bargain built on mutual desperation and fragile hope. Neither mentioned that his thumb lingered on her wrist a moment longer than necessary. Neither acknowledged the spark that passed between them, dangerous, unwanted, impossible to ignore. The weeks that followed transformed Elowen from prisoner to player. By day, she performed the role of dutiful duchess, meek, quiet, and decorative. She sat through interminable dinners where Morwen held court, absorbing every word, cataloging every glance exchanged between the dowager and her network of allies. She smiled vapidly when spoken to and pretended not to notice when Morwen's barbs drew blood. By night, she hunted. Mrs. Hatch became her first ally, a surprise that revealed itself 3 days after her bargain with Lysander. The housekeeper had served Thornwood for 40 years, had known Corvin since his birth, and harbored a hatred for Morwen that burned cold and patient. The young master was kind, Mrs. Hatch told Elowen one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. He treated servants like people. When he died, something died in this house too. She pressed a ring of keys into Elowen's palm. These open most doors in the west wing. The dowager doesn't know I have copies. Use them wisely. Elowen used them ruthlessly. She discovered that Morwen kept a private study in the North Tower, accessible only through a hidden passage behind the library. She learned that correspondence arrived weekly from London, always sealed with black wax and always burned after reading. She found a locked drawer in Morwen's dressing room that contained letters, dozens of them, addressed to someone named Hadrian. Who is Hadrian? She asked Lysander during one of their midnight meetings, now a regular occurrence disguised as marital duties. Lysander's face went pale. My uncle, my father's younger brother. He was disinherited 20 years ago for, I was never told exactly what. Father refused to speak of him. He supposedly died abroad, penniless and forgotten. Supposedly? If he's alive, and my mother has been funding him, Lysander's jaw tightened. Then every assumption I've made about her motives may be wrong. The puzzle was shifting. revealing darker shapes beneath. Eowyn threw herself into learning the estate's inner workings with the same ferocity she'd once applied to surviving her father's household. She memorized servant schedules, mapped hidden corridors, and cultivated relationships with kitchen maids and stable hands. She learned which floorboards creaked, which doors could be silently opened, which shadows offered concealment. Lysander watched her transformation with something approaching wonder. "You're not what I expected," he admitted one night, reviewing the notes she'd compiled on household expenditures. "What did you expect? Someone who would weep and wilt. Someone I could ignore until she served her purpose and then forget entirely." He looked up from the papers. "Instead, I find myself..." He stopped. "Find yourself what?" "Relying on you." The admission seemed to cost him. "I haven't relied on anyone since Corvin died. I'm not certain I remember how." Eowyn felt something warm bloom in her chest, a sensation she ruthlessly suppressed. This was strategy. Alliance. Nothing more. "Then let me teach you," she said. "Trust is built through action, not words. Watch what I do. Judge me by results." "I already am." His gaze held hers. "So far, the results are impressive." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given her. Eowyn told herself the flutter in her stomach was merely hunger. She was lying, of course, but some lies were necessary for survival. 2 days later, an invitation arrived that would test everything she'd learned. The Countess of Ashworth was hosting a winter ball, and the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood were expected to attend. Morwen's smile when she read the invitation sent ice through Eowyn's veins. "Oh, how delightful," the Dowager purred. "Your first public appearance, my dear. Do try not to embarrass us." The challenge had been issued. Eowyn intended to answer it. The Ashworth ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and diamond-draped necks. 400 of England's most influential nobles filled the space, and every single one of them was watching Eowyn. She felt their assessment like needles against her skin. The whispers had already begun. She'd heard them in the receiving line. Nobody bride, debt payment. Poor Lysander, saddled with a merchant's daughter. Morwen stood nearby, resplendent in black silk, accepting condolences as though Eowyn's very existence was a tragedy she bore with noble grace. "Breathe," Lysander murmured beside her. His hand rested at the small of her back, warm through the sapphire velvet of her gown. "You've faced worse than gossips." "Have I?" "You faced my mother without flinching. This is merely performance." "Then watch me perform." Eowyn stepped forward into the crowd, and the performance began. She'd studied for this. Mrs. Hatch had coached her on every family represented tonight, their scandals, their alliances, their weaknesses. She knew that Lady Ashworth's youngest son had gambling debts. She knew that Lord Whitmore's wife was conducting an affair with her music teacher. She knew that the Dowager Countess of Blackmore had once been a governess before marrying above her station. Knowledge was currency, and Eowyn intended to spend lavishly. "Lady Blackmore," she said, approaching the elderly countess with a warm smile. "I've heard so much about your charitable work with orphaned children. My own mother supported similar causes before her passing. I would be honored to contribute to your efforts." The countess's suspicious expression melted into approval. "How thoughtful, Your Grace. We must discuss this further." One ally gained. She moved through the ballroom with calculated grace, complimenting the right gowns, inquiring about the right children, expressing interest in the right causes. She avoided controversy, deflected questions about her family with practiced vagueness, and never once let her smile waver. When Lord Hartwell, a notorious gossip, tried to corner her about her father's debts, she pivoted smoothly. "Lord Hartwell, I couldn't help but notice your wife admiring the Ashworth Gardens earlier. Lady Hartwell has such exquisite taste. You must tell me the name of her modista. The color of her gown is absolutely divine." Hartwell, disarmed by the compliment to his wife, abandoned his interrogation entirely. Across the room, Eowyn caught Lysander watching her. He raised his champagne glass. A small gesture, barely noticeable. But she understood its meaning. Well done. The real test came at midnight. Morwen intercepted her near the refreshment table, eyes glittering with malice. You've been busy, little mouse, making friends, building alliances. She leaned closer. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I thought you'd appreciate a daughter-in-law who enhances the family reputation rather than diminishing it. Morwen's smile turned razor-sharp. Careful, child. Mice who scurry too boldly tend to find themselves caught in traps. Then perhaps I'm not a mouse after all. Eowyn walked away before Morwen could respond, her heart hammering but her steps steady. She'd survived her first battle, but the war was only beginning. The weeks following the Ashworth Ball changed everything. Eowyn's social success had rattled Morwen. She could see it in the tightness around the dowager's eyes, the increased sharpness of her remarks, the way she watched Eowyn with something approaching wariness. But it had also changed Lysander. He sought her company now, not just for midnight strategy sessions, but for morning walks through the frost-covered gardens, for quiet dinners where they discussed books and politics and the estate's struggling tenant farmers. He listened when she spoke. He asked her opinions. He remembered details she'd mentioned in passing and referenced those weeks later. You're different, Eowyn observed one evening as they reviewed correspondence in his study. Less frozen. Perhaps I'm thawing. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. You have that effect. I wasn't aware I was meant to have any effect beyond producing an heir. The words hung between them, a reminder of how they'd begun. Lysander's expression clouded with something that looked almost like shame. I was cruel to you, he said quietly. That night. The things I said. Yes, you were. I've spent so long building walls that I forgot how to speak without weaponizing every word. He set down his pen, meeting her eyes. You deserved better. You still do. It was an apology. Imperfect, halting, but real. Eowyn felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a door she'd kept bolted beginning to ease open. I didn't come here expecting kindness, she admitted, but I've found it anyway. From Mrs. Hatch. From the staff. And from you. Despite your best efforts to be terrible. I am rather terrible. Moderately terrible. You're improving. He laughed. A genuine sound that transformed his face, softening its severe angles into something almost boyish. Eowyn realized with sudden alarm that she wanted to hear that laugh again. Often. Forever. Dangerous thoughts. Impossible thoughts. She buried them quickly. 3 days later, a letter arrived that shattered their fragile peace. Lysander found her in the library, his face ashen. My Uncle Hadrian is alive. He's been living in Edinburgh under a false name, and according to this, he held up the letter, he's returning to England to claim what he calls his rightful inheritance. Can he do that? You're the legitimate heir. I'm the legitimate heir if my father was legally married to my mother. Lysander's voice was hollow. Hadrian claims he has proof that my parents' marriage was invalid, that my mother was already married to someone else when she wed my father. If that's true, you'd be illegitimate, Eowyn breathed. Hadrian would inherit everything. And my mother has been funding his investigation for 20 years, bleeding the estate dry to pay for lawyers and investigators and witnesses. Lysander crumpled the letter in his fist. She killed Corvin because he discovered the truth, and now she's going to watch Hadrian take everything while I'm left with nothing. Eowyn crossed to him, gripping his arms. We have 3 weeks before Hadrian arrives. 3 weeks to find proof of her crimes, proof of Corvin's murder, proof that whatever documents Hadrian has are forged. How can you be certain they're forged? Because your mother is a snake, not a saint. If she had legitimate grounds to disinherit you, She would have done it years ago. She's manufacturing evidence. We just need to prove it. Lysander stared at her. You still want to fight? Even knowing you might end up married to a pauper instead of a duke? I married a man, not a title. The words escaped before she could stop them. Besides, I refuse to let that woman win. His hands came up to cover hers where they gripped his arms. What did I do to deserve you? Nothing yet. But you're learning. The proof they needed was in Morwen's private study in the North Tower. Alawen had circled that room for weeks, never quite finding the right moment to breach its defenses. But with Hadrian's arrival looming, caution was a luxury they could no longer afford. She waited until Morwen departed for her weekly visit to the village church, a performance of piety that fooled no one who knew her true nature. Then she slipped through the hidden passage behind the library, Mrs. Hatch's keys clutched in her trembling hand. The North Tower study was smaller than she'd expected, crammed with locked cabinets and stacked correspondence. A portrait of the late Duke, Lysander's father, hung above the fireplace, his eyes seeming to follow her as she searched. She wondered if he'd ever suspected his wife's treachery. The locked drawer yielded to her smallest key. Inside, she found what they needed: letters between Morwen and Hadrian dating back 2 decades. Payment records showing massive sums transferred to Edinburgh solicitors. A forged marriage certificate with obvious inconsistencies in the ink and paper. And buried at the bottom, a document that stopped her heart. A confession, written in Corvin's hand, dated 3 days before his death. I have discovered the truth about our mother's first marriage. The certificate is false. I found the original registrar's records in London, and no such union ever occurred. Mother knows I have this proof. She has threatened me, but I will not be silenced. If something happens to me, know that she is responsible. I am hiding copies of everything with... The confession ended mid-sentence. Torn. Incomplete. But enough. More than enough. I knew you were a clever mouse. Elowen spun. Morwen stood in the doorway, her expression carved from marble. Did you think I wouldn't notice my keys had been copied? Did you think I would leave anything incriminating where a common interloper could find it? You killed him. Alawen's voice shook with fury. You killed your own son. Corvin was weak, sentimental. He would have destroyed everything I built to protect some abstract notion of truth. Morwen stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Just as you would. Just as my fool of a son would. Lysander knows everything. If anything happens to me, Lysander will believe whatever I tell him. He always has. Morwen smiled, cold and beautiful. I'll tell him you were stealing, that you were working with Hadrian all along, that you seduced my son to gain access to our fortune. By the time I'm finished, he'll hate your memory. He won't believe you. Won't he? You've known him 2 months. I've shaped him for 30 years. Morwen produced a small vial from her sleeve. This is painless, I'm told. You'll simply fall asleep and never wake. Far kinder than what Corvin received. The door crashed open. Lysander stood in the threshold, chest heaving, eyes wild with fury. Behind him, Mrs. Hatch and 3 footmen crowded the narrow passage. Step away from my wife. Morwen's mask finally shattered. Shock, then rage, then something almost like despair. You were supposed to be in the village, she whispered. Mrs. Hatch sent word the moment you returned early. Lysander moved to Elowen's side, placing himself between her and his mother. I heard everything. The confession, the murder, everything. Lysander, darling, you must understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was ice and fire. Guards, take the Dowager Duchess to her chambers. She is not to leave under any circumstances. As they dragged Morwen away, her screams echoing through the tower, Elowen finally allowed herself to breathe. They had the proof. Now they needed to survive long enough to use it. Morwen's confinement should have ended the threat. It didn't. Hadrian Vane arrived at Thornwood 3 days early, accompanied by a magistrate, 2 solicitors, and a document he claimed would transfer the dukedom to its rightful heir. Elowin watched from the gallery as Lysander received them in the Great Hall. Hadrian was nothing like she'd imagined, not the villainous mastermind of her nightmares, but a withered man in his 60s, bitter lines carved deep into his face, greed gleaming in eyes that mirrored Lysander's own. "Nephew," Hadrian drawled. "Or should I say, bastard? I've waited 20 years for this moment. And you'll wait 20 more if you think I'll surrender my birthright to a fraud." "Fraud?" Hadrian produced a sheaf of documents. "These papers prove your mother was legally married to Edmund Blackwell in 1832, 4 years before her supposed wedding to your father. Your parents' marriage was bigamy. You are illegitimate. The title, the estate, everything. It belongs to me. Those documents are forged. We have proof." "Proof? From whom?" "Your mother, currently confined to her rooms like a madwoman?" Hadrian smiled. "The magistrate has already reviewed my evidence. He's prepared to rule in my favor unless you can produce something more compelling than accusations." Lysander's jaw tightened. "I can produce Corvin's confession, in his own hand, detailing how our mother fabricated the marriage certificate and murdered him when he discovered the truth." The magistrate stepped forward, a severe man named Blackford with no apparent sympathy for either party. "Such a document would indeed be relevant. Do you have it?" "I have it," Elowin said, descending the staircase, "along with 20 years of correspondence between the Dowager Duchess and Mr. Vane, detailing every payment made to manufacture this fraudulent claim." Hadrian's confidence flickered. "Who is this woman?" "My wife, the Duchess of Thornwood." Lysander's voice carried steel. "And the person who uncovered your entire conspiracy. A desperate bride defending her meal ticket." Hadrian recovered quickly. "Her testimony means nothing. She has everything to gain from lying." "Then perhaps you'll believe me." Every head turned. Mrs. Hatch stood in the doorway, flanked by a man Elowin didn't recognize. Elderly, dignified, wearing the robes of a London solicitor. "This is Mr. Pemberton," Mrs. Hatch announced. "He was Lord Corvin's personal solicitor. Before his death, Lord Corvin entrusted Mr. Pemberton with copies of every document he'd gathered, including the original registrar's records from 1832, proving that no marriage between Morwen Caldwell and Edmund Blackwell ever occurred." "Mr." Pemberton stepped forward, producing a leather case. "I've kept these documents sealed for 5 years, as Lord Corvin instructed. He believed the truth would emerge eventually. He asked me to wait until someone brave enough to challenge the Dowager came forward." His gaze found Elowin. "I believe that someone has arrived?" The magistrate examined the documents for what felt like hours. Elowin stood beside Lysander, her hand in his, neither willing to let go. Finally, Blackford looked up. "These registrar's records are authentic. The marriage certificate Mr. Vane has presented is demonstrably forged. The paper is modern manufacture, and the signatures contain inconsistencies with verified samples." Hadrian's face went gray. "That's impossible." She assured me. "Your co-conspirator, the Dowager Duchess, has deceived you as thoroughly as she deceived everyone else." Blackford tucked the documents into his case. "Mr. Vane, you will be remanded to custody pending charges of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. The Dowager Duchess will face additional charges of murder, attempted murder, and embezzlement." As the magistrate's men seized Hadrian, his composure shattered completely. "She promised me. She swore the documents were perfect. I gave her everything, my inheritance, my life, 20 years of waiting." "And she used you," Lysander said coldly, "just as she uses everyone. You're not her ally, Hadrian. You never were. You were simply another tool." They dragged him away screaming. In the sudden silence, Elowen felt her knees weaken. Lysander caught her immediately, pulling her against his chest. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over." His voice was rough with emotion. "Because of you. All of this. Corvin's vindication, my freedom, everything because of you." She looked up at him. "I told you I had an excellent memory for debts. You saved me when you didn't have to. I simply returned the favor." "You did far more than return it." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Elowen, I need you to know something. I was wrong about everything. About you. About what this marriage could be. About what I was capable of feeling." "What are you capable of feeling?" His answer wasn't words. He kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, pouring 5 years of grief and isolation and newfound hope into the connection. Elowen kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, her heart surrendering completely. When they finally parted, breathless, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he said. "I didn't plan to. I didn't want to. But I do, and I'm finished pretending otherwise." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I love you too. Even though you're moderately terrible." "Only moderately?" "You're improving faster than expected." He laughed and kissed her again, and for the first time since arriving at Thornwood, Elowen felt like she was home. The trial of Morwen Vane, Dowager Duchess of Thornwood, became the scandal of the decade. Held in London's Central Criminal Court, it drew spectators from every level of society. Peers crowded the gallery beside merchants and servants, all desperate to witness the downfall of a woman who had murdered her own son and conspired to destroy her own family. Elowen sat in the front row, Lysander beside her, as the prosecution presented its case. The evidence was overwhelming. Corvin's confession, the forged marriage certificate, 20 years of correspondence with Hadrian, bank records showing embezzled funds, testimony from servants who had witnessed Morwen's cruelty, her threats, her casual discussions of eliminating obstacles. And then there was Mrs. Hatch. The housekeeper took the stand with quiet dignity, her voice steady as she recounted decades of service to Thornwood and decades of witnessing Morwen's crimes. "I saw her that morning," Mrs. Hatch testified, "the morning Lord Corvin died. She told him she wanted to discuss his findings privately. She suggested a walk by the lake. He didn't want to go. He hated the water, everyone knew that. But she insisted. She was his mother. He trusted her. And what happened next? He never came back." Mrs. Hatch's voice finally broke. "They found his body 3 hours later. The dowager wept beautifully at the funeral. But I saw her eyes. There was no grief there, only relief." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order. Morwen sat in the dock, her once elegant composure reduced to rubble. She'd aged 20 years in the weeks since her arrest, gray roots showing through carefully maintained auburn, lines of bitterness carved deeper, eyes that darted constantly seeking escape routes that no longer existed. When it came time for the defense, Morwen insisted on speaking herself. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising with desperate conviction. "I did everything for this family. My husband was a fool who would have squandered the estate on charitable causes and progressive nonsense. Corvin was weak, too soft, too honorable, too like his father. Only Lysander had the steel to lead, but he was blinded by sentiment." "So you killed your own son to protect the family?" the prosecutor asked. "I removed an obstacle. There's a difference." The gallery gasped. Even her own solicitor closed his eyes in defeat. "And the embezzlement? The conspiracy with Hadrian Vane?" "Insurance. If Lysander proved as disappointing as his brother, I needed alternatives." Morwen's gaze found Lysander in the crowd. "Everything I did was for you, to protect your inheritance, your legacy. You should be thanking me." Lysander stood, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. You murdered my brother. You tried to murder my wife. You stole from the estate you claimed to protect and conspired to destroy everything my father built. His voice broke slightly. You are not my mother. You are a monster wearing her face. Morwen flinched as though struck. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was transportation for life, exile to the colonies, stripped of title and privilege, condemned to end her days in obscurity and disgrace. As guards led her from the courtroom, Morwen locked eyes with Elowyn. You, she hissed. You ruined everything. A nobody. A debt payment. And you destroyed me. Elowyn rose, meeting the dowager's hatred with calm certainty. No. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose cruelty over love. I simply ensured you face the consequences. He'll tire of you. They always do. You'll die alone and forgotten, just like... That's enough. Lysander stepped between them, shielding Elowyn from his mother's venom. You have no power here anymore. No words that can wound us. Go to your exile and know that everything you built has become everything you tried to destroy. A family built on love instead of manipulation. They dragged Morwen away, her screams fading into echoes. The crowd began to disperse, but Elowyn stood frozen, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Lady Blackmore approached first, taking Elowyn's hands warmly. Your Grace, what you've done, the courage you've shown, it's extraordinary. You've not only saved your husband but vindicated a young man whose death went unavenged for 5 years. Corvin deserved justice, Elowyn said softly. I only wish I could have known him. He would have adored you. Mrs. Hatch appeared at her elbow, tears streaming down her weathered face. He always said his brother needed someone with fire, someone who wouldn't let him retreat into ice. Mr. Pemberton, Corvin's solicitor, joined them. I have something for you, Your Grace. He produced a sealed letter. Lord Corvin left this with his documents. He asked that it be delivered to whoever finally exposed the truth. Elowyn opened the letter with trembling hands. To whoever reads this, if you're holding this letter, then my mother's crimes have finally been revealed. I don't know who you are, or how you accomplished what I could not, but I thank you. My brother Lysander believes himself incapable of love. He's wrong. He simply needs someone brave enough to scale his walls and stubborn enough to stay once they've reached the other side. If you are that person, please tell him this. I never blamed him for not saving me. I only hoped he would find someone worth saving himself for. With gratitude and hope, Corvin Elowyn's vision blurred with tears. She handed the letter to Lysander without speaking. She watched his face as he read, watched grief and healing war across his features, watched him fold the letter carefully and press it against his heart. He knew, Lysander whispered. He knew I would need you before I even knew you existed. Perhaps some things are meant to be. I don't believe in fate. Neither do I. She took his hand. I believe in choices. And I choose you. Today and every day after. He pulled her into his arms right there in the emptying courtroom, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had shifted beneath his feet. Let's go home, he said finally. We have a future to build. They returned to Thornwood as the first snow of winter began to fall. The manor felt different now, lighter somehow, as though Morwen's exile had lifted a shadow that had pressed upon its stones for decades. Servants smiled openly, fires burned brighter. Even the portraits seemed less severe. Elowyn stood in the great hall, watching snowflakes drift past the tall windows, when Lysander found her. I've been thinking about our wedding night, he said quietly. She turned. That seems an odd thing to dwell on. I told you to give me an heir and leave. I treated you as something less than human. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. I've spent weeks trying to find words adequate to apologize, and I've failed. There are no words adequate. So instead, I want to show you. Show me what? That you were never a transaction, that you were never disposable, that from the moment you stood in that doorway and told me you remember every debt owed, you became the most important person in my life. He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. This was my grandmother's. She gave it to my grandfather on their wedding day, told him it represented her promise to stand beside him through any storm. I want you to have it. Inside the box lay a ring, delicate gold filigree surrounding a deep blue sapphire that caught the firelight like captured starlight. We're already married, Elowen whispered. That was a contract. This is a choice. He slipped the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. I choose you, Elowen. Not because you saved me or exposed my mother or gave me back my brother's memory. I choose you because when I'm with you, I remember who I was before grief turned me to stone. I choose you because you make me want to be worthy of being chosen in return. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You, impossible man. I'm supposed to be the eloquent one. Then tell me what you're feeling, in whatever words you have. She looked at the ring on her finger, at the snow falling beyond the windows, at the man standing before her with his heart finally, completely open. I'm feeling like I came here expecting prison and found home instead. I'm feeling like every terrible thing that led me to this moment was worth enduring because it led me to you. I'm feeling like I love you more than I knew I was capable of loving anyone. Is that eloquent enough? It's perfect. He kissed her softly, reverently, as snow continued to fall outside. They had begun as strangers bound by debt and desperation. They had become partners united against a common enemy. And now, finally, they were simply two people who had chosen each other. Not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine choosing anyone else. 1 year later, Thornwood Manor had been transformed. The North Tower, once Morwen's private domain of secrets and schemes, now housed the Corvin Vane Memorial Library, a collection of books and educational resources open to every tenant farmer, servant, and villager on the estate. Elowen had designed it herself, filling the shelves with texts on agriculture, medicine, law, and literature. Knowledge should never be hoarded, she told Lysander. It should be shared. The estate's finances had recovered remarkably. With Morwen's embezzlement ended and competent stewards installed, Thornwood was thriving. Tenant rents had been reduced. Cottages had been repaired. A new school had been built in the village, staffed by teachers Elowen personally recruited. Her sisters had arrived 6 months ago, Marguerite and Colette, wide-eyed and overwhelmed by their sudden elevation in status. They had their own wing now, their own tutors, and their own futures stretching bright and unencumbered before them. Marguerite had already attracted the attention of a kind young viscount. Colette had declared her intention to become a physician, and Lysander had promised to fund her education regardless of what society thought appropriate. You've changed everything, Mrs. Hatch observed one morning, finding Elowen in the memorial library arranging new acquisitions. Not just the manor, him. The whole spirit of this place. I simply reminded everyone what they were capable of, Elowen replied. The potential was always here. It just needed permission to flourish. That's what you do, though. You give people permission to be more than they believed possible. Mrs. Hatch smiled. Lord Corvin would have loved you. I say that with complete certainty. The anniversary of Corvin's death passed differently this year. Instead of Lysander drinking alone in his study, drowning in grief, they held a memorial in the gardens. Servants and family gathered together, sharing stories and memories, celebrating a life rather than mourning a death. Lysander spoke about his brother with tears streaming freely down his face, and no one thought him weak for it. That night, as they prepared for bed, Elowen took Lysander's hand and placed it on her stomach. I have something to tell you, she said softly. His eyes widened. Are you? The physician confirmed it this morning. You're going to be a father. For a moment he simply stared. Then his face transformed, not with sorrow, but with joy so overwhelming it couldn't be contained. An heir, he whispered. A child, she corrected gently. Ours, not a transaction, not an obligation. A person will love and raise and set free to become whoever they choose to be. I told you to give me an heir and leave. His voice wavered. Those were the first words I ever spoke to you as your husband. And now you're stuck with me forever. She pulled him close. How terribly inconvenient for you. He laughed through his tears. The most wonderful inconvenience of my life. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach where their future grew. Later, as snow fell softly outside their window and the fire crackled low, Lysander held her against his chest and spoke into the darkness. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For refusing to be what I tried to make you, for seeing through my walls, for loving me even when I gave you every reason not to. He pressed a kiss to her hair. I spent 30 years believing love was weakness. You've shown me it's the only strength that matters. Elowyn smiled against his chest. You know, I still remember every slight, every cruelty, every debt owed. And what do I owe you? Everything. But fortunately for you, I've decided to collect in installments, one day at a time, for the rest of our lives. That seems fair. I thought so. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Thornwood in white. A fresh start, a clean page, a future unwritten. Lysander Vane had demanded an heir and dismissal. Instead, he received a partner, a purpose, and a love that would last long after the snow melted. Some debts, it turned out, repaid themselves 1,000 times over. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, the transformation from cruelty to love, the power of refusing to be diminished, the strength it takes to choose hope over bitterness, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment and where you're listening from. If you're ready for another story where love rewrites impossible odds, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next chapter. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that even the coldest hearts can learn to love.